I am here with David Gilmour. How would you like to be introduced this time around?
I'm a professor at the University of Toronto, teaching literature and creative writing. I've published about 10 or 11 novels, and you've been kind enough to have me on your show a couple of times. I won the Governor General's Award probably because I won a good jury. Everybody knows that you don't win an award, you win a jury. And you had me on. I think we had a very interesting clash that first interview. So anyway, Here we are. We're back.
We're back, and you told me not that long ago that you're a fan of Truman Capote's writing.
I'm the great Canadian fan. I'm the only one I know who teaches Truman Capote on his university curriculum. It's a slightly hard sell. A lot of people don't understand that he was not just a talk show pet who was 5 feet tall, wore white scarves, and had a baby whale's voice, but he was actually a great stylist, as great as any stylist in the 20th century. Scott Fitzgerald, Proust, and Truman Capote, they're all on the same level. He was a truly great artist, but his work, because it tended to be about largely social issues and social people, he loved rich people.
Yeah.
And young people are not so impressed by that, this particular generation. And it's not that I'm impressed with rich people, I'm impressed with the way he writes about rich people, the same way that I'm impressed not with Scott Fitzgerald's rich people, but everyone who reads The Great Gatsby wants to go to those parties because they're the best parties in literature. It's the way rich people are treated. And it's the same thing for Truman Capote. So when I read Capote, I had the same response to him that I did when I read The Great Gatsby, which was it was like some drug was fed into my system. And I remember thinking it was Music for Chameleons, which was the first book of his I read. And I thought, oh my God, this guy writes like an angel. He takes words and he throws them up in the air and they just sprinkle down on the page in the most magical pattern. It seems effortless, but one of the things I've learned is the signature of great art is that it appears to be effortless, but isn't.
Yeah, well...
I hope that wasn't too windy for you.
No, that was...
These are my party tricks.
Well,
Do you want to give us a hint of the first paragraph?
Well, first of all, we talked about reading two or three of his short stories, and we've settled on Mojave.
Can I just set Mojave up?
Please do, yeah.
Okay. Truman Capote wrote an unfinished novel called Answered Prayers, and it cost him all his friendships in higher society because he told all the secrets, all the dirty secrets that the rich people, the Kennedys, the really super rich people of the States, had told him because he was sort of their house pet. He then sat down and wrote this book, which essentially bit the hand that fed him. And the very first story is the best of the bunch. It's called Mojave. And he was 30 years old when he wrote it, and he asked the editor of Esquire to fly down to his house to see it. And they had a feeling that it was probably pretty good. The editor flew down. Capote made him have a swim, then made him have a martini, and then stalked across to the other side of the pool and watched him read it. The editor read it and said, Truman, this is brilliant. This may be the best thing that you've ever written. And that included In Cold Blood and all of his Miriam, Headless Hawk short stories before. Okay, there's your setup. This is the very first story in Answered Prayers, which eventually Capote decided not to include in the book because he didn't think it fit organically, but he was wrong.
Well, I should say that now I've read just this afternoon a good part of Unspoiled Monsters, which is
Dazzling.
Really funny as hell.
And not only, you can't read anyone after you've read Capote. Everyone else, it's like riding a Rolls Royce and then suddenly find yourself on a country road in a Jeep. You can't. The one thing about Capote is you've got to wait for 24 hours before you can read anyone else because his prose is so pure that it makes everyone else seem like a vulgarian.
Well, some of it's pretty vulgar.
Yes.
For example, this is in Unspoiled Monsters. A burly guy with a broken nose and a flushed, freckled Irish complexion nobody you'd take for a queer, but he was.
That's very true. And using nobody, even when this book was written, nobody used queer anymore. It's
No.
just fearless. And,
Yeah.
and if you listen to the rhythm of the sentence, nobody you take for a queer.
Yeah.
It's just perfect.
But he was.
Yeah, but he was. It just bespeaks such fantastic control and humor. The thing about Capote was he was very, very funny.
In fact, I was a kind of Hershey bar whore. There wasn't much I wouldn't do for a nickel's worth of chocolate.
Yep. Yeah, he created a narrator for this book called P.D. Barnes.
Yeah,
And he is a
P.B. Jones. isn't
P.B.
it?
Jones, right?
Yeah.
That's it. And he was a professional masseur, which
Yeah.
I think is a very ingenious idea about how you would get the secrets of the rich, because everybody tells their masseur everything. And so that's how, I think, why he created that particular persona.
Okay, listen to this one. Although facial exercises are a lot of crap, the only effective one is cocksucking. No joke, there's nothing like it for firming the jawline. With my assistance, Agnes Beerbaum improved her facial contours admirably.
Well, you see, the thing is, I have a feeling, I don't know because I'm straight, but I have a feeling that that's probably true. The thing about Capote is, for all his flippancy, there are periodically glimpses of truth, observations that are extraordinarily trenchant. For example, here's one right here, which is from Mojave, and he's talking about this woman, and that he says she wanted to laugh, and at the same time she couldn't because she realized that he was serious, and also because she knew well how true it was that certain persons could only be made to recognize the truth, be made to understand by subjecting them to extreme punishment. Now, there are people in the world who will not accept the truth unless it's accompanied by a smack on the side of the head. And Proust makes the same observation. He says there are some people who simply, it's easier to slam their head against the wall than to try to explain to them why they should stop behaving the way they're behaving. This is in the arena of extraordinarily accurate perceptions. Here's another one. I know how trite this is, a character speaking, and for the moment it's no help. But remember, the narrator says, there's always somebody else. Just don't look for the same person. That's all. And I've thought of that many times because I've had a number of women leave me in my life, and I have realized that he's right, that you actually are tempted to go out and try to find somebody like the person who just left you, and it's always a disaster. And the only way you're ever free from a previous love is to find someone who is not at all like that person. And I came across this first in Capote, and it was one of those dazzling moments of recognition where you go, that's the truth. Okay, so away you go. Did you want to read?
Yeah, I'm just going to go with the very first sentence in Mojave is, at 5 p.m. that winter afternoon, she had an appointment with Dr. Benson, formerly her psychoanalyst and currently her lover. So if that doesn't get you rearing to get to an answer.
Yes, absolutely. Because Mojave is really, it's about nobody ever getting what they want, and that it's about that everyone else gets what you want and you get what they want, but you never get what you want. And that really seems to be a message that runs all the way through that story. And I think it was true for Capote. He never managed, he was gay, but he never managed to find anyone who wanted him, and the people who did want him, he didn't want.
It's interesting, the narrator here, she's having this affair, but she automatically sort of starts questioning herself. Why am I having an affair with this guy who's basically a loser and he doesn't he doesn't even appreciate anything. She gives him gifts, she gives him money, and the guy that she's having the affair with is nowhere near the man that her husband is.
Yes.
But she's still having an affair with this guy.
That's right. And she's, if I remember correctly, she doesn't sleep with her husband because she's afraid of getting pregnant again. Is this, if I got the right character? She is in love with her husband, and for some reason they have no sex life together. And he himself feels something that we have all felt, you and I, which is as you get older, young women stop looking at you the way they used to, and they start to look at you as if you're a fire hydrant or a parked car.
Or invisible.
You become invisible. And her husband has lost his sexual interest in his wife.
But she also had the kid, too, and I think that traumatized her. And she really didn't want to have anything to do with sex after that.
Yes, yeah. But the part I have difficulty in buying is I have not met in my life, and I'm 70 years old, so I've been at the business of men and women for, let's say, 50 years. 50, 50. That's a long time. I've never really met a woman who was in love with another man who went to bed with somebody so beastily unattractive as the individual that she chooses, the Dr. Benson. And my suspicion is that Truman knew that he could write a character who was piggish, hairy, sweaty, and unattractive, and he decided to employ that character because he knew he would do it well. But to be absolutely honest with you, if you step aside from the exquisite, seductive prose, I'm not sure that that's true.
Believable, yeah.
I'm just not sure. But it's so exquisitely written. And I've taught this story at the university. I must have read it 10 or 15 times. I don't care if it's true because it's like $100 an ounce liqueur.
Yeah. She wore her own hair, fluffy and, I love this here, tobacco colored, like a childish areola around her deceptively naive and youthful face.
You know, there are kind of empty phrase makers. The guy who wrote the John Lennon biography, for example, the very first one, he's dead now, but he was a classic phrase maker. And Gore Vidal was a classic phrase maker, which is they would opt for the good, well-turned phrase at the expense of the truth. But with the exception of a few moments in this story, I don't feel like Truman is phrase. I feel like he's capturing magic. He's capturing fire. And let me just, if I can, read you a paragraph that I've got underlined here. This is a description of the same woman, the one who's in love with the man who's not her husband and who's sleeping with this unattractive Dr. Benson, of her apartment. Now listen to the prose. A South Seas Gauguin over the mantel and a delicate fire fluttering in the fireplace. French windows offered a view of a darkened garden, drifting snow in lighted tugboats floating like lanterns on the East River. I mean, that's as good as it gets. But it's not just phrase making. It is, I think, it sounds pompous, it's great art. It's great painting. Words as strokes of a paintbrush.
Well, and that's what that puts you in mind of, is a painting.
Yes, it is.
Looking at a painting.
And he goes on to say that in this same room there rested an ice-filled silver bucket. Embedded in the bucket was a carafe brimming with, get this, pepper-flavored red Russian vodka. It's brimming not just with vodka, not just with red, but with pepper-flavored red Russian vodka. That's what the French called le mot juste.
Right. Okay, now we get into something that's quite thought-provoking. And she has a hairdresser.
Yeah,
is it Carlos, or is that...
Who's been abandoned by his lover.
And yeah, he's upset because what happened is his lover has fallen in love with a woman, a young woman, and the young woman is perfect, and she's suggested that the three of them live together.
Yes.
Okay. So here's what Carlos says. The only way I can communicate, and this is on page 69 at the top. The only way I can communicate with him is to kill him. Then he will understand. Okay, so is this a theme here?
Well, you know, as I
Then
said,
he'll understand.
there are a few moments in Capote where I feel as if he succumbs to the drama of language because, once again, I don't know, in my experience in 50 years, any gay man who has ever fallen in love with a woman and left his lover. I've known gay men who've left their lovers because they want to have children, because they've been exhausted with the gay life, but I've never seen someone do it by preference.
Unless he's just bi. Maybe he wasn't. He wasn't.
Well, you know, that's interesting. I don't think there's any such thing as a bi guy. I think you're either gay or you're straight. Okay. And every time some guy tells me that he's bi, I know he's gay and he's ashamed to admit it. And I don't know why he's ashamed, but I've never met a convincing bisexual male in my life. You're straight or you're gay or you're a liar.
You don't think there's a spectrum where you can be...
Since I'm going to put my foot in my mouth, I'll say this. I think that women can be bisexual. And I've known a number of women who've had completely satisfying relationships, sexually consummated relationships with women, and fully satisfying relationships with men. Yeah. I don't believe the reverse is true. I don't believe, I've never encountered a man who can actually make that claim convincingly. I mean, I don't care. I'm always vaguely astonished when some man tells me they're bisexual because they never are.
That's interesting. This is the second time you've questioned Truman now.
Yeah.
But you're willing to give him the benefit of the doubt, and you're willing to suspend that doubt because of the
quality
prose.
Of the prose.
Yeah, the style.
The thing about it is Hemingway was a great pain in the ass. I understand that, and he was not a very pleasant man. But Hemingway doesn't lie. And when you read books like A Farewell to Arms or The Sun Also Rises, there are no moments where you read them and you go, that couldn't happen. I think one of the rules of literature, great literature, is it doesn't have to have happened to you, but it must be able to have happened. I think in Truman's case, occasionally he's carried away with the excitement of his prose and he creates situations which I don't believe. But I also don't care that I don't believe them because I find the quality of the prose so pristine and so exciting. But if you want the truth, unfortunately, you've got to go to Hemingway because Hemingway really never lies. At least in his books, he was an enormous bullshitter in real life. He couldn't tell the truth. He didn't have a good word to say about anybody, and he lied all the time about everything. But he didn't lie about human behavior in his books. Truman does. Bless his heart. And by the way, I know people, because I interviewed his biographer, Truman was in real life a notorious liar.
Yeah, he just doesn't come across as a nice guy.
Truman just lied about everything. He could not resist telling stories. Yeah. And you always knew that he never had a good word to say about another writer. He shared that with Hemingway. They both put each other down madly. But the thing with Capote was, and I used to sort of defend him, but then I suddenly realized that there's a reason why lots of people don't like somebody. You know, whether it's John Lennon or Truman Capote, these people have enemies for a good reason, and it's not always sour grapes. And the thing with Capote is you realize that the nasty stuff he's telling you and delighting you over lunch about is exactly the same kind of stuff he's going to say about you when you're not there. Yeah. And that's I've always found that with backstabbers. You think that you're getting the special goods from them, but you're not, because they're going to dish you up the minute you leave the table.
And how do you have a relationship with someone like that?
You can't, because they're liars. You
can't trust them.
You can't have a relationship with an alcoholic, a drug addict, or a liar. These are things that at the age of 70 I have learned the hard way. You can't have a relationship with them. And I think that's why, sadly, Truman was very, very alone at the end. And Shut a Final Door, which we'll get to, is the most eerie roadmap of his future that he wrote when he was 23. But we'll get to that later.
Let's go to suicide now. And that's the reason for most suicides. Someone is torturing you, you want to kill them, but you can't. All that pain is because you love them, and you can't kill them because you love them. So you kill yourself instead.
Yeah, I think that's a lovely, lovely piece of phrasing, but I think it's bullshit. I'm not going to get into a personal story here. I'm familiar with suicide. I'm familiar with the issue. I'm familiar with the experience. I've been close to people who did it. It's just not true. When people commit suicide, it is as if they have no logical, reasonable other option. In other words, suicide is not an act of emotion. It's an act of what seems to be cold, calculated fact. In other words, it's like saying, am I going to jump out of this building or am I going to shoot myself? There is no third option.
It's
and when
tunnel
you get
thinking,
to that stage, you are crazy enough to kill yourself. But it does seem logical. You think, I think actually jumping out of the 82nd floor is probably a better idea, and people do it. But it's often done under the delusion of being rational. I don't believe what Capote writes there for a second. And I think that Capote himself was on a long suicide thing, but I think it was suicide by seeking anesthetic. I think he didn't like the sensation he carried in his body, and so he drank and he drugged himself to get rid of it. I don't think it was any more than that until it became an addiction.
I think the other thing too about suicides often is that you feel like you will never ever find love again.
Yes.
You become convinced of that.
Yeah, it seems to be because you think, I haven't got it now, so why would now ever change?
Yeah, and it's me. I'm unlovable. I can't.
And why would that
attract?
change? Yes,
Yeah.
and then the extraordinary thing is, you meet someone, they fall in love with you, and that seems perfectly natural to you too. You think, well, yeah, of course they're in love with me. That makes sense. And so you alternate, at least I have in my life, back and forth between these two poles of being either arrogant about being loved or destitute because you never will be loved.
Yeah. Okay, back to the story. The cousin who was married to a harridan and lived in Greenwich. I think maybe it's like what I liked there was married to a harridan and lived in Greenwich, just together. It's like, okay, married to and oh, by the way, he lived in Greenwich.
Yeah, yeah.
It's an aggressive statement that's followed by a matter-of-fact statement.
So what it is, it's the sentence of somebody who has a very good ear. And Capote's ear was musical. It was very musical, and Scott Fitzgerald was musical. These guys had, if you read a Capote sentence, and if you don't mind, I'm just going to actually read one to you right now.
Yeah.
And this is her whispering to her husband just as she's falling asleep, or pretending to fall asleep, because she's terrified of having intercourse with him. She's terrified of getting pregnant because her last pregnancies were so terrible. So they're lying almost ready to fall asleep, and she says, now listen to the rhythm, the musicality of these two sentences. I love you too, she repeated with pretended sleepiness, and with a feigned languor she moved to draw the window draperies. Drawn, the heavy silk concealed the night river and the lighted river boats, so snow-misted that they were as muted as the design in a Japanese scroll of winter night. You could put that to music.
It very painterly too, I find.
Very painterly.
Because again, he thought
Very
about
painterly.
Japanese,
Yeah.
and it puts everyone has an image of that, and it puts that directly in your mind.
They're like a series of colored paintings, one after the other, his stories. So that's why the narrative line sometimes isn't so important, because you're so seduced by this masterly array of paintings, delicate, perfect paintings, one after the other.
Yeah.
It is like $100 an ounce liqueur. There is nothing like Capote for sheer prose pleasure.
So from suicide to sheer prose pleasure and paintings to orgasms.
Yes.
Here we are.
Oh my
Here we
God.
are. Here we are. We're going back to the guy that she's having the affair
The
with.
unattractive,
Yeah.
hairy, greedy
Ezra.
Dr. Benson.
Yeah, Ezra Benson.
This is the description of one of his orgasms.
To judge from appearances, orgasms were agonizing events in the life of Ezra Benson. He grimaced, he ground his dentures, he whimpered like a frightened mutt. Of course, she was always relieved when she heard the whimper. It meant that soon his lathering carcass would roll off her, for he was not one to linger, whispering tender compliments. He just rolled right off.
Yes, and there is that. I think following one of his orgasms, there's a delightful description of him reaching greedily, and today, having done so, he greedily reached for the present, a blue box, knowing that it was a gift for him. Opening it, he grunted. She explained, "It's a gold toothpick." He chuckled, an unusual sound coming him, for his sense of humor was meager.
Yes. And yet she's still having sex with him.
Yeah.
But she does, interestingly, dump him really sort of abruptly.
Yes.
So anyway, here is a theme, I think, because coming to the paragraph after that, we see that she doesn't understand. Sometimes that's the only way you can get the message across. Give her a fat lip.
Oh, I know. He's a total pig. And what Truman's so brilliant at is, now that's great dialogue. You can, a second-rate writer will say, well, somebody has the sensibility of a pig, but you can then put a phrase or dialogue or something in their mouth that will do all that work for you, too. And the same thing, to reiterate what you're talking about, after she gives him, after his orgasm and he takes the gift she's given for him, he grunts, "That's kind of cute," and then he began picking his teeth.
Yeah.
You know what happened last night? Then he refers to his wife. "I slapped Thelma. I slapped Thelma, but good. And I punched her in the stomach, too." I mean,
Dude,
if
what
you
an
want the
asshole.
portrait, if you want the portrait of a pig,
Yeah.
skillfully portrayed, you know exactly what this guy's like. And you can see the greedy relish with which he both picks up the gift, but also recounts slapping his wife around. No, it's the portrait of a pig.
Yeah. And she's having sex with him.
Yep.
Well, okay. This is a throwaway line, but it stuck with me. It's like, this is how he starts it off, this paragraph off. He says, "Like many analysts, Dr. Benson was quite literal-minded."
That's very interesting, isn't it?
That's quite a lovely put down.
Yeah, it really is. It really is. And you know that probably Truman had his share of psychiatrists over the years, and that probably, and it's true, and it may be, it's both a put down, but also it's quite an accurate description of a psychiatrist, and also maybe a good one, because a psychiatrist is not seduced by your language. They can often cut right through it and say, what you're really saying is this. And in fact, they can be very literal-minded.
Yeah. Okay. I just felt there was a bit of a slap.
But it was a slap. It definitely was a slap. Because I don't think, for all his experience with psychiatrists, I don't think that helped him at all.
Yeah. Closely observed, however, one sensed a secret fatigue, a lack of any real optimism. His wife was, this is her husband.
The one she loves but can't have sex with because she's afraid of getting pregnant. Since then, she's talking about having a child. The child had been born 2 months prematurely. Since then, she had never shared a bed with her husband. She wanted to, but she couldn't. For the naked presence of him, the thought of his body inside hers, summoned intolerable terrors. The child was born prematurely, had nearly died, and because of massive internal hemorrhaging, so had she.
Yeah, now she's, this is what he, the husband, is observing. Closely observed, however, one sensed a secret fatigue, a lack of any real optimism.
Oh, that's so great.
His wife was severely aware of it, and why not?
Have you never felt that?
She was its principal cause.
She was its principal cause. That's interesting.
She was its principal cause, i.e., the lack of any real optimism.
Wow.
And she was aware that she's making him unhappy.
You know, I missed that. That's interesting. That actually it's not life weariness, it's actually disappointment in what she no longer makes him feel. And it is true, when you're with someone you don't want, there is a feeling of hopelessness and bleakness.
Well, she's afraid that she's the cause of his unhappiness.
Right.
And so I guess now we should say that she's feeding him all sorts of women he can have affairs with throughout this.
Which seems, forgive me for sounding like a Puritan, that seems like a completely degenerate activity to me.
No, it's not Puritanism at all. It's like, what are you with him for?
Yeah, exactly. Good. Because I've always read that and I thought, I don't have any sympathy for someone. That's a disgusting way of, I'm pimping for your lover seems like the lowest rung on the ladder.
Yeah. Earlier on, he actually says to her that he's going to leave her if they don't have a kid, right? He basically threatens to leave her if they don't have the kid. The husband does.
I don't remember that. I'm sorry, I don't remember that. We'll probably have to scratch that. I don't remember that. Because there's the malaise of that story is the same way as the dentist. The one, I think Carlos is the name. It's once again, he doesn't get what he wants.
Right.
Dr. Benson, strangely enough, the only one who gets what he wants in the whole story is the pig. And the pig gets to have carnal relationships with this woman who's intellectually, spiritually, and emotionally superior to him.
Yeah.
And so what does it say when the only person in the story is a pig and he's the only one who gets what he wants?
Well,
I've never thought of this before.
Well, he goes off
that's actually true.
He goes off and another patient who's pretty well like her, he's basically does the same thing with the next patient too.
Right. It is as if he's suggesting that happiness is available to the vulgar only, because all the refined people in this story are wounded by love and are crippled by love and by the fact that they don't get what they want from it. And I think that's true of Truman, but I don't feel I don't think that that's true of life. I don't know whether you feel that way, but I don't feel as if love, and I've been married a number of times, but I don't feel like love has been a disappointment to me. I feel like love has been a source of great happiness and great unhappiness, but most of all has been an enormously electrifying life force that is the best thing I think about being alive. I've always thought that.
Well, you're with Tolstoy there.
Yeah. Yes, exactly.
But
more so than publishing books, or more so than even having children whom I adore. But there is something about the sparkle of love that really does make life change its entire complexion right in front of you. And when it's taken away from you, the entire world is draped in a kind of grayness.
Not even. It depends, I guess, how intense it was. It's not grayness. It's as dark as you can get. Black.
Yeah,
it's the end of life.
It's the end of life. There's a wonderful poem by Apollinaire called Zone, and he talks about one of the characters in his poem marching through Paris, and I'm going to say it, comme si tu ne devais plus jamais être aimé, forgive my accent, but saying as if you will never be loved again. And I've always remembered that line from that poem. I read it when I was 18, and I still remember it, feeling as if you will never be loved again. It's an illusion, if it's the greatest argument against suicide is if you can just stick around long enough, life will give you what you want. Yeah,
it's like and again, it's trite, but there's more than one fish in the ocean, and you have to believe that.
And Capote is right when he says, just don't look for the same one. And that's maybe the truest thing. When I read that story maybe 20 years ago, And I think that probably of that whole story, the thing that I come back to most often when I think about it is that line, which is, "You will fall in love again, but just don't look for it in the same kind of person."
Yeah. This, I got a little question mark beside this one here. The protagonist and her husband are having a conversation, and we go, "He was always careful not to offend her, just as she took the same care with him, a consequence of the quiet that simultaneously kept them together and apart."
Oh, that's dazzling. That's dazzling. It's
I don't
interesting,
understand it.
Well, I what it does is it means that their manners are so exquisite that it allows each one of them to be comfortable the whole time. But in that comfort, there's a separateness because they're never forced to feel anything, explain anything, confront anything. So in the comfort is the alienation, because they're never challenged or quarreled with, and I know that from my own experience that relationships that are like that, which are when you never, I mean, the death signal of a relationship to me has always been if you don't fight with your lover, you have a dead fish on your hands. I think that's what that statement is saying, that they make each other so comfortable that they are not intimate in any way at all, because that's difficult, that's challenging, that's trouble, and they both sheer away from it. And I also understand, too, that after a while, you want a comfortable life. You don't want a confrontational life. I mean, I'm older now, and so are you. You know, I used to think that love and passion and fighting all night was how to live. I don't anymore. I actually think now that I'd rather have a peaceful, easy life. And maybe it's not as confrontational and as spicy. Maybe not. But I want a love affair where I can live, not a place that I visit and have to retreat from. I want to have a life to go along with my love affair.
That was well put. You should write that down.
Well, I will. But I also, because I do, and I don't think that precludes spice. I also used to think that as a young person. I used to think that, no, if you're not battling all night, you lack spice. I think that finding love is really a numbers game. Yeah. I think you have to go through a lot of people. You have to throw a lot of people back. But let me just finish this thought. And if you don't do that, then you end up settling for something else. But I think, and I believe this, and I don't think it's just romantic gibberish. I think if you look long enough and hard enough and you throw the little ones back, you will eventually get what you want. There, I've said it.
That's a lovely, optimistic way of looking at the universe. We're talking fish here, too. You're throwing them back, right? So there's more than one fish out there.
Yeah, for sure. And I know, as I said, I've been married 4 times.
We're now entering the Mojave Desert, and that's because the husband is regaling his wife with this lengthy story about this old guy that he's young and he's hitchhiking in the desert.
Yep.
And he comes across this old guy
who,
quote, looked as if he'd been lying in a hammock all his life.
Oh, brilliant. How great is that?
Yes. Yeah, we like
and that's the thing where he's standing out on the deserted highway with the sun beating down and a truck goes by and it doesn't do anything but run over a rattlesnake.
Yeah.
That image has stayed with me for 20 years. The rattlesnake crawling over the highway.
Yeah.
And the truck going, boom,
yeah,
running it over and chasing down the highway. Yeah.
And here's another example. First of all, there was a very clever little thing. Where is that?
And there's a sentence in there where this guy's ex, I believe, was, quote, fucking the balls off Freddie Fender. And I remember thinking, fucking the balls off Freddie Fender. I've never heard that expression before, but it's actually it's a very apt expression. And I think Capote made it up. I don't think I've ever heard that expression used before or since.
This is another example of of Capote just, again, sort of starting with something that's interesting and then just throwing something else after it that's disjointed but funny and appropriate, I guess. Ever since my wife died, she died the same day Hitler died.
No,
Helga had been driving me to work.
Total throwaway.
Yeah.
But, you know, that's why in his prime, Capote was at the center of every table, because he would say things that were so sparkling and so amusing and so clever.
Yeah.
And you know, one of the tragedies of, well, I don't know if it's a tragedy, because I've always actually thought that given his terrible upbringing and the trauma of being gay in the 50s in the Deep South, I think it's astonishing that drug addict, alcoholic that he was, that he went on to produce as much stuff as he did. So I don't think the story of Truman Capote is a tragic one at all, even though it wound down in a tragic manner. I think the fact that you can take his books, and we've got them in front of me right now, stacked up, and I think it's a miracle that he did as much as he did, given the drawbacks he started life with. Abandoned by his mother at the age of 3.
Yeah.
I think that's the thing. Like, I don't hang my head when the name Truman Capote comes up, because in the end, he has this marvelous body of work. And yes, he did drink himself into madness and death, but he did more work than almost any other American writer in the 20th century of top drawer quality.
Well, thank you for introducing me to him. I hadn't really spent much time with him at all.
Good. I'm glad. Yeah, I'm good. I'm expecting my students to come back in about 5 years and say, "Oh my God, I suddenly reread that story you taught us." And sometimes teaching is like that. Sometimes it takes 5 or 6 years to sink in. And I've been trying to teach them Tolstoy and Capote, and I know that it hasn't taken now, but I know that with all good teaching that it will eventually. They'll pick up and they'll go, "I have to read Mojave. I have to read it right now." That was the experience I had with The Great Gatsby. I read it when I was 17. It did nothing for me. 8 years later, I was in France, and I woke up one morning and I thought, I think I have to read The Great Gatsby. And I went out and found it, and I read it, and up to that point in my life, it seemed that day to be the greatest book I'd ever read in my life. And it made me want to be a writer. It changed my life, but it did nothing 7 years before when I read it.
That is so true about reading. It's about getting the right book at the right time.
Absolutely.
And how do you do that? It's very difficult.
Well, I think what you do as a parent or as an educator is that you expose your children to a whole bunch of stuff, most of which they're not interested in, but you put the seed in, very much like the seed was laid in me for The Great Gatsby when I was 17, and I really didn't register at all, and the seed matured and opened 7 years later. The same thing happened with Tolstoy, by the way. I read a biography of him when I was 30, and then 5 years later, out of the blue, I suddenly thought, I think I have to read War and Peace. And when I read it, I thought, I was in the Caribbean, I remember, and it was so extraordinary that I was stopping people on the road in front of my hotel on the way to the beach saying, "Have you read this fucking thing?"
Yeah, I was very lucky with Tolstoy and Dostoevsky. I got it early 30s, exactly the right time.
Great.
So
Great. And you know, in the end, the important thing is my son is 34. He still hasn't got Tolstoy, but he will.
Yeah.
One of these days, it's just going to happen. And because I bored him to death for 15 years now about Tolstoy. And you know, I'm teaching. I teach a class in creative writing, but I start every class with a reading of 2 paragraphs from War and Peace, and I go, folks, you know what time it is? It's time for. I say, what is time? And they say, oh, it's time for the good book. And I said, and what is the good book? And one student will put their hand up and say, it's War and Peace. And I'll say, okay, here we go. Here's today's reading. And I know that 5 years from now, half that class is going to pick that book up and go, oh my God, that old guy was right. This is great. Right now they tolerate it, but in 5 years they'll love it.
So no one puts up their hand and says it's wine o'clock? No, it's
No.
I just
No.
read that the other day.
No.
It was stupid. Okay. Now, this, I think she's a prostitute, comes into the old man's life.
Yes.
And her name is Ivory Hunter.
She's the one who
Ivory Hunter.
Ivory Hunter. Great name.
Yeah.
And she's the one who ends up fucking the balls off Freddie Fender.
And anyway, so he's talking. The old man is talking, and this is being told by the husband to his wife. Talking about her, and he says, "Yes, sir, Ivory was all cunt."
That's right.
And then a little bit further down the paragraph, we read the Bible together, and night after night she would read aloud from magazines, good magazines like Reader's Digest. So that just tells you automatically what this guy's like.
Yeah, absolutely.
Good magazines like Reader's Digest.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. That's how a great writer captures a character.
Yeah, exactly. Doesn't have to say any more than that.
Don't have to say any more than that. It's like when you meet someone and you say, "Well, how are you feeling about your American president?" And they say, "Oh, we think he's the greatest guy." Do you know there was a poll recently? This has nothing to do with it, but I have to tell you this.
Sure.
Yesterday in CNN, that taken among Republican. And they asked them, "Who do you think was the better president,
Lincoln
or Trump?"
Yeah.
And 58 or 60% of them said Trump. It makes me understand, and this is nothing, but I want to just say this. It makes me understand the rise of Hitler in Germany. I've never done it before.
Ignorance of the past
and refusal to hear facts. That facts bounce like BBs off these people. They don't penetrate. And I've never believed until now that people could be impervious to fact.
Yeah.
But there is like an illness right now which has made people in the States impervious to facts.
Well,
they
half
just
them.
bounce
Half
off.
them. Yeah.
Half of them. But half of them. I mean,
Yeah,
that's a lot of...
Well, how do these people not see what's so patently obvious?
And they don't care. I think the problem is someone said this to me 2 years ago. They said, "You don't understand that they don't care." And I don't understand how you can be confronted by facts and not care. Opinions, who cares? But facts. But the scariest thing is I suddenly understand how Hitler rose, which is there's a kind of illness that takes possession of people where they do not care about the facts. Everybody knew what Hitler was up to for years before he... Mm-hmm. They knew it for years.
Here again is this theme, and this is, we all sometimes leave each other out there under the skies, and we never understand why.
I think that's, I think that's true. That is one of those uncomfortable truths. When you first read it, you think, "Oh, that's not me. That's Truman phrase making again." But actually, when you think about that, all of us, at some point, have left somebody by the side of the road, and you think, "Oh God, I've actually done that." Somebody once said to me, they said, "Even your best friends will at some point betray you." And I think it's true, and I don't think that means they're bad people or that they're not best friends. But the notion that all of us, read that sentence out to me again, will you? Because I find that sentence very stirring and very moving, but very...
read it again. Yeah, I will read it again. I just want to go, this is toward the very end of the story, and after the story, because the old man in the desert is dumped by Ivory, right?
Right.
And then he says, "I love you, Sarah," and Sarah says, "I love you too." But
that's the married guy.
That's the married couple. But then it says, "But the touch of his lips, the insinuated threat, taunted her."
And I think that's the pregnancy thing again, and that even a kiss from him suggests sexual intimacy, which suggests pregnancy, which suggests this nightmare ritual of giving birth, hemorrhaging, almost dying.
And dying, yeah. He gave a slight pressure to their interwoven fingers, and with his other hand raised her chin and insisted on their eyes meeting. He moved her hand up to his lips and kissed its palm. Let me just see here. Okay, so I'll read that that sentence out again, and then I'll read what comes after it. We all sometimes leave each other out there under the skies, and we never understand why.
Yeah.
An echo caverns resounding. Jamie, Sanchez, and Carlos.
Those are the two gay lovers.
That's right.
Who are
The
breaking
hairdresser.
up. The hairdresser and his lover.
And
who has abandoned him for a woman.
Yeah, and the woman is, well, not quite abandoned. They're still going to live together,
right.
Which is weird for him and unpleasant. That's Angelita.
But abandon the exclusivity of their love affair by wanting to turn
yes,
it into
exactly.
somewhat improbable.
Hulga and Freddie Fio and Ivory Hunter and Mr. Schmidt, which is the people in the desert.
And it's his girlfriend and
Dr. Benson and
Dr.
George.
Benson, the hairy, sweaty,
yeah,
greedy.
And George is the husband. George and herself.
Is the attractive husband who is the one who says, now when I'm in a room of fairly attractive young women, they look at me as if I'm not there, as if I'm just an old guy who smiles too much.
Yeah.
Great description. I've remembered that one for 20 years too.
Yeah. Okay, and then I love you too, she repeated with pretended sleepiness and with a feigned languor moved to draw the window drape. You've read this part, right?
Yes.
Yeah, there we are. George, an urgent plea before the supper-laden Irish woman arrived, expertly balancing their offerings. Please, darling, we'll think of somebody.
Isn't that, yeah, absolutely. Her saying to him, look, don't worry, I'll find somebody for you to love and that we'll both be happy. And it's the most pathetic search for a solution.
Yeah.
You think of all the solutions that they've been reduced to, she's hoping that that's going to be one.
She's his pimp. She's a pimp.
And that one of these days I will find a woman for you that you really enjoy. And that's
as long as you stay with me.
As long as you stay with me. That's as good as it's ever going to get for them. And that's what I meant, that it underlines the theme of the story, which is that nobody ever gets what they want except the pig, Dr. Benson.
Well, I think it's talking about how miserable and maybe fake the lives of the rich are.
I think that's a good point. I think that's a very good point.
I mean, not just the rich, but,
no,
they've got this. You've got this image of if they've got all this money and opulence and beautiful things in their lives, they must be pretty happy.
I think you're right. I think that's the aquarium that Capote swam in, and I think, like Scott Fitzgerald, he thought that these people had it all and should be happy, and continually discovered, the way Fitzgerald did, that actually very rich people aren't happy. And remember, there's a famous line that Scott Fitzgerald said, and Hemingway made fun of it because Hemingway was a pig, but Scott said to him, Ernest, the rich are very different from you and me. And Hemingway always prided himself on the line saying back to him, yes, Scott, they have more money. But actually, that's not true. Scott was right. The rich are very different. And one of the things that characterizes them, I think, is a kind of unhappiness. The unhappiness that comes from acquisition fatigue, which is that you have had everything, you've stopped looking, and you've settled for the fact that what you want isn't havable. And there is a kind of gray tragedy in that. And I think that that's what Capote talks about when he talks about these people. You're right. It's not a coincidence. They're all swimming in money and swimming in a lack of fulfillment. And even more so in the later stories, Cote Basque in this book with the 4 stories, Answered Prayers. It's really a book about Trimalchio. You remember Trimalchio? Trimalchio was in Satyricon, and he was a slave who eventually got his freedom and became enormously rich, and threw huge parties. And Scott Fitzgerald based Gatsby on Trimalchio. But Truman Capote was kind of a spy in the house of Trimalchio. He went into the houses of the very, very rich as a spy, and came back with the news. And the news was, these people really aren't happy. It's not just poor people saying that to make themselves feel better. They are authentically unhappy.
And he got blackballed and blacklisted for that.
Absolutely.
For telling the truth about
For
that.
telling the truth about them.
In such an entertaining way.
Fabulous. I know. And the problem is, though, that a lot of people didn't give him credit for that. They said, and I've even talked to fairly distinguished critics who said, yeah, but it's too bad that he wrote that last book, Answered Prayers, because it's just about sex and just about gossip.
This last book is his best.
I agree.
I haven't read a lot, but from everything I've read in the last few days, this is really good.
Yeah, it is. I've read it again and again and again, and it's kind of a guilty pleasure because you know that Truman is being naughty, but he's so skillful at his certain kind of high-end gossip, and his argument is, which is, look, Proust is just gossip too. Gossip turned into art. I think he's taken his explorations Capote has with the swimming pools and the New York rich, and he's made it into art. And I think that's why you respond the way you. I'm really pleased that you like that book so much, because a lot of people are shy to admit that they like it so much, because it's almost too much fun to be literature. You know what I mean? And they think it's not good for you, but it's hugely entertaining. And I think in itself that's good for you.
Yeah, exactly. There's lots of really good laughs in here. But as I say, and I think this may also have done him in, the fact that he discovered and was put in touch with all of this unhappiness, I think that probably contributed to the fact that he became dependent on drugs.
Yeah.
And I think your point about him covering the American rich could be called trivial, but it's not trivial.
No, it's not.
I mean, you compare it to Proust, I find it just as entertaining.
I find it more entertaining than Proust, and I think, and Capote said an interesting thing about Proust once, and I've never figured out whether it's right or not, but he said about Proust, he said, I would be really interested if Proust had actually just told stories of the people that he based those characters on, rather than turning it into art and disguising them. And I remember thinking, well, that's a silly remark. And then I thought about it, and I thought, no, if you do that, if Proust were to have written about the people directly, naming names and real stories, you would have the Answered Prayers for France in 1920. That would have been his Answered Prayers. But Truman made the decision not to take it that one extra disguising step into art. I think he was too impatient to do it. I also think he knew he had a great thing going, and that's what he wanted to write and how he wanted to write. Proust didn't want to write like that, but Capote did. Capote liked writing about those people in this bitchy, observant way.
And he got some big advances for this.
Yeah,
and in fact they kept giving him advances and extending the deadline. Now why couldn't he finish the damn thing?
I don't think that you can be an addict and do anything but be an addict.
Right.
And I think that what Truman could do was he wrote an exquisite book while he was doing this. He was playing around with this book for 25 or 30 years. They started off by giving him a $25,000 advance because he was just coming off writing in Cold Blood, which was an international bestseller. They gave him $25,000. He did a chapter and then stopped, and he got distracted. Gradually, the drug usage and alcohol usage and the moral decay from hanging around with these kinds of people who really did have empty, entertainment-seeking lives, I think it began to corrode his soul, and he became less and less productive. He could only work in sprints, which is why there's an exquisite book of short pieces that he wrote, which is as good as Andrew's Prayers, and it's called Music for Chameleons. And it's short pieces of about 1,500 to 2,000 words. And I think he was doing cocaine when he wrote it, but for some reason he could handle cocaine. He couldn't handle alcohol, and he couldn't handle pills. But for and his biographer told me this. He said for some reason Capote could handle cocaine, and on cocaine he wrote much of the Music for Chameleons. Have you read it?
No, but I've heard that it's not so good.
It's a jewel. It's the same people who put down Answered Prayers put it down. They think it's glib and it's too easy, but it's the same sensation that you have, which is $100 an ounce liqueur. You have to read it. It'll knock you out.
Okay.
And
Wow.
Mojave, by the way,
Yeah.
is the first piece that he puts in Music for Chameleons. He decided not to put it in Answered Prayers, and he put it into Music for Chameleons. So it's a
Okay.
great kickoff for that book.
What should the reader go for first then? You think Chameleons and then Answered Prayer? Does it matter?
I don't think it matters.
Doesn't matter,
I think, but those are the ones. I think that they're more entertaining than even his masterpiece in Cold Blood and his early short stories that made him quite famous when he was in his early 20s. Still, if you want to know Capote at his best, read either Music for Chameleons or Answered Prayers.
Okay.
And don't try to read anybody else after him for at least 24 hours.
I think we've
think
done
I'm
him
fired.
justice. We're here in advance of Christmas, and I had thought of dealing with another of his short stories, A Christmas Memory, which is quite different from the one we've been discussing, Mojave, but I think that we really have done...
I think he'd be delighted.
Yeah.
I'm a big believer in something that Truman forgot at the end of his life, which is always try to leave the party while you're still welcome.
Okay, so it's time to leave the party.
I think it's time to leave the Capote party.
Okay, well, thanks for making it a party. It's been a pleasure.
My pleasure. Thank you.
I've been speaking to David Gilmour, who is a professor at, is it Victoria College?
Victoria College.
Victoria College at the University of Toronto. Thanks again.
Good. You're welcome.